You're at the Coaching Inn, 3D Coaching's virtual pub, where we enjoy conversations with people who are engaged in the world of coaching.
Morning, welcome to this week's episode of In the Arena. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Kirsty Elderton. I'm the CEO of a coaching company called Simply Coaching, and we also partner with 3D Coaching. And I was an associate of 3D in the UK for many years while I lived in the UK. I'm now based over here in Melbourne, and as well as my coaching practice, I'm also a consultant, a management consulting firm where I lead the design practice there and do a lot of projects looking at how to redesign services around the needs of people. And it's endlessly fascinating to me how coaching shows up in all sorts of unexpected situations, whether it's coaching new consulting clients in how to use design approaches and methodologies, whether it's about coaching team members to perform in their roles, or coaching the team to perform to get to be a really high performing team, or whether it's coaching skills in things like co-design. But just to set the scene a little, while Claire's away on sabbatical walking the Camino, we've put together a mini series, if you like, that explores coaching at the intersection of leadership. And we've taken all of those wonderful leadership qualities like adaptability, creativity, equity, and we've asked someone who magnifies this quality to step into the arena and describe what it means to walk the talk, if you like, of this quality day in and day out. So whether you're a coach, whether you're a leader, whether you're someone that experiences coaching, I hope that there's going to be something in this for you where you can learn from someone who really is a great example of that skill and quality, and think about how it might apply in your own practice. And so today is absolutely no different than some of the other episodes. I'm really delighted to have with us today Carolina Gaitan, and I'm going to ask Carolina to introduce herself in a moment. But before I do that, I should say that I have been gently stalking, not in a very creepy way, I hope, Carolina's career for the whole time that I've lived over here in Melbourne. And I've seen firsthand the really deep empathy that she has for her friends, for her family, for her colleagues, and for her work. And I'm sure Carolina will tell you more about her work in a sec, but she's worked in all sorts of sectors, in all sorts of industries, and brings that real sense of authenticity and deep empathy into everything that she does. And so when we were thinking about talking about empathy on this episode, there was no one better, I thought, than we could to invite into the arena with us this morning than Carolina. So today the focus is empathy, and we're really delighted to have you with us, Carolina, to hear more about you, more about your work, and more about what you've been learning about this much talked about leadership quality, empathy, in all of the different places and spaces that you show up. So kick us off, Carolina. Let's introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, your work, and perhaps what empathy means to you.
Thanks, Kirsty. First of all, I have to say that I'm a bit emotional now. Thanks for those kind words about me.
Oh, it's
and I feel a bit scared also because I feel that I'm not that I still have a lot to learn in the space of empathy. But that's something that we will talk about today. But talking about me, I'm Carolina Gaitan. My accent is from South America, so I'm from Colombia. I was born in Bogota, Colombia, but I've been living in Melbourne for 9 years now, and now I can call myself a proud Australian also. and that's part of my journey. The journey of migration brings new context to change your perspective. And that has a lot to do with empathy that we can talk about today also. And career-wise, well, I'm married. I don't have kids. With my husband, we decided not to have kids many years ago. And career-wise, I've been working in the design space, in human-centered design. and innovation for almost, oh my goodness, more than 15 years, I would say, plus another 10 years in marketing. I work, as you mentioned, in many industries. I started working in fast-moving consumer goods. But when I came to Australia, I work more. I've been working mostly with government, developing new products and services to serve the greater good, and that's something that I'm really proud of, being working for a greater purpose, serving public transport users or bushfire recovery affected communities, or working with many state governments, helping them to improve how they serve the community. That's me.
Thank you, Carolina. So just you talk there about the sort of diverse spaces that you've been working in, everything from kind of consumer products all the way through to kind of bushfire recovery and a bunch of stuff in between. Carolina, just tell us a little bit about how important empathy has been in all of those diverse spaces that you've worked.
Yeah, I think that it's about caring about people. And I ended up I started in marketing because I was told in university, oh, marketing is all about the user and the end consumer. In practice it gets modified a bit more in terms of how you push and sell a bit more products, but that's what drove me towards marketing, and then coming into product development and service design is making sure that whatever services or products organizations are delivering, it's about the people that they are serving. And the nature of understanding, either if it's in consumer goods or government services, is understanding people's needs, drives, and how the products or services that you work on are helping them to achieve their goals. And empathy plays an important role, because it's important to bring people along the journey, to put yourself, we talk a lot about putting yourself in the shoes of others, but it has so many meanings that over the years I started with, okay, empathy is about putting yourself in the shoes of others, but when you bring your own context in those shoes, it's not the same. So you have to be very careful in how you manage your biases to understand someone else's point of view, because your context is very different. And for me, I've been lucky of changing context through industries, for example, or moving to another country. Helps you to bring new perspectives and see how people would see things differently, because their context that they've been living in is different from yours. So I think that the changes in different across different industries has helped me to see that context and how people live situations are very different from your own.
That's so interesting, Carolina, because I was just reflecting that in the work that you do, there's a level of kind of interpretation of people's needs to build that kind of empathy that you're describing. And I was just thinking that in the coaching space, one of the things I think great coaching, and Claire speaks to this so wonderfully in her book Simplifying Coaching, is that one of the things we try to do in the coaching space is to not interpret, or to not over-interpret on someone else's behalf, or make meaning for them. And so I'm wondering how you find that tension between those two different modes of, oh, I need to understand and make sense, versus, I can help create space for you to understand and make your own meaning, which is more of a coaching angle.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning that. I forgot to say something very important at my introduction, and is that I've been lucky enough to participate with you in 3D training on coaching. And I didn't know much about coaching before that. I've experienced coaching before, but one of the things that I learned a lot from transforming conversations, it was about exactly what you just said. That is not about that you are there as a listener and as a facilitator of someone else's thinking process. And that requires tons of empathy because it's not about you being there to fix the problem for someone or to tell them what to do or to put in your own thinking. It's more about supporting that person to go through their own sense making process. And that's super critical for empathy, and that's one of the tools that I've been using most, because I'm not practicing as a coach like in itself, but in everything that I do, it's about bringing that mindset of I'm a learner here, I'm a facilitator in this process, and therefore my ways of thinking are not critical or important here, because our whole life we've been taught that your value is in producing something that is on your own or giving someone else advice. So it's really counterintuitive from what you've been told what your value is, especially in the professional environment, and changing that mindset to it's about being here as a facilitator.
I love that reflection, Carolina, that it's sort of counterintuitive and a bit opposite to what we're told is valued, fixing things, solving problems, making stuff happen, as opposed to equipping and enabling others to make their own meaning and have their own, either big light bulb moments or many sort of small light bulb moments along the way. I'm wondering what that means for how others experience your leadership style.
Well, what I've heard in the feedback that I always ask for is that sense of ownership of what people do, so that you're opening a space for them to contribute, to do what they need to do, to bring their own thinking, and especially when you become a leader or a manager, especially when managers, it's very strange. Being a manager is super critical, but it's something that you're not trained on. And usually a career path is that you get a level of expertise that then puts you in that managerial career, but actually you have to unlearn that you are not now only the expert and you're not just imposing your ideas into others, but it's setting back a bit, holding sometimes a bit your expertise to allow your team to come up themselves with the answers. So it's holding that space that allows people to bloom and to do what they need to do, which is really hard because your whole life before you get into management roles, you are always trying to prove that you are the expert, that you are the one that is bringing the solutions to the table. So it's really hard to make that shift. And it takes a lot of self-awareness and work in yourself more than more technical expertise.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Because I think when we think about empathy, we think about understanding others. But what I'm picking up, Carolina, is something that actually I think Brené Brown talks about in her descriptions of empathy, which is actually it starts with knowing yourself and knowing your own emotions and having that self-awareness. And that's sort of what I'm hearing from you as well.
Yeah, and that's a really great point, because when we had the discussion about doing this podcast, I started going back to reading some things and rereading a bit of what Brené Brown says in there to lead on empathy. And that has been my experience, because sometimes the definition starts with put yourself in someone else's shoes. So it's not about yourself, it's about the other person, which is true. But the thing that we don't think about is that in order to do that, you have to leave behind your own baggage. So and so starting with knowing yourself, and when she talks about shame, for example, and where the and that sorry in shame, what she talks about is one of the sources of shame. It's that sense of vulnerability, putting yourself out there. And if you're living what you know of, and what you're being known as the expert, and you leave that behind, that opens some space for vulnerability. And that's where shame comes in. And then for you, it's really hard to really move away from that, and being in the space of the other person, being uncomfortable in a space where you don't have the same context, you don't have the same experiences that person has had in the past, and you are not there to provide your advice or your expert opinion. So that's why it should always start with working in yourself. So the more you know yourself, the more you know your biases, your flaws, then the more you can go out there and put your vulnerability in front of someone else, and lift that barrier to really empathize with that person. So even sometimes when the definition about putting yourself in the shoes of the other person, I don't like it much, because it could be misinterpreted as I bring my own baggage and I just think about this person, but it's what I would do in this situation. And actually it's the opposite. If we use the same analogy, I would say that the shoes are the ones that have that experience, that context. So you literally have to take your shoes off, which is leaving that baggage behind, and just bring yourself in terms of who you are as a human. And then when you put the other person's shoes on, is, well, this is a new context, this is a new experience, and trying to feel what that feeling, how it will feel like. Because we all, as humans, we all understand that common language of feeling, how feeling shame, how feeling fear looks like, but how those feelings feel in different contexts that you've never been in is what you need to do through empathy. So it's being very conscious of that, of leaving your baggage behind.
And there's the other word that was just sort of buzzing around my head while I was listening to you, Carolina, was this word awareness. Because there's also that, in a coaching mode, there's also I'm noticing a feeling in myself that may have something to do with the thing that's been talked about in coaching, and by being able to name it and label it can be really helpful. But if your starting position is my shoes are fine, I'm coming to explore your shoes, there's sort of a funny power imbalance there, isn't there? There's an othering thing that happens, which feels counter to the idea of empathy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's why always thinking that you can empathy starts with being comfortable with your own imperfections. Because sometimes we think that the only way that we can empathize with others is because you are in a better position than that person, and that's not necessarily true. That's why sometimes the best people to provide empathy in a situation is someone that has gone through hard situations, not necessarily the same, but because they can feel better, they can understand better that situation. So in this case is the opposite. The less you know about those situations, the harder it is to put yourself in. But at the same time, one of the things, and actually I'm going to recommend this later, I've been reading some things, but going back to the analogy of putting yourself in the shoes of others, that sometimes when you've been in those shoes before, when you've experienced that thing, it's much harder to empathize with that person, because you bring your own experience. So when, in my context, when you are part of a target market, if you're talking about in the commercial space, or you are a user of that product or service, it's harder to empathize with others, because we assume that my experience is everybody's experience. And that's not true, because the context for everybody, even if everybody went through bushfires here, for example, everybody lived it in a different way. And there's a lot of studies showing how different communities and the level of resilience and in that community before the event play a role in how people live that experience. So the context is different, and therefore, yes, it's the same event, but everybody lives it in a different way.
And it sounds so blooming obvious when you say it, doesn't it? But actually, it's really hard to practice, because we slip into that, oh, my experience is the same as everybody's, particularly if you're from the dominant cultural norms of a place.
Yes,
I think it's a really useful reminder.
Yeah.
One of the other things I've been thinking about, Carolina, around empathy is, and you mentioned part of your story is migration. You're also female, English as a second language, with an empathic leadership style. And I was wondering if others confuse empathy with, I'm going to say weakness, but insert your own word here, confuse it with something else.
Yeah. Sometimes what I've noticed, for example, and you talked about some of my own characteristics about being different, so being a migrant, being a woman in a country where the main language is not my native language. One of the things that surprised me when I came to Australia that I never felt before in my own country is feeling that you're being treated differently because you are a woman in the working space. And especially when you come from a third world country and you have this idealized world of, Australia is a first world country, everything is perfect, right? And you come in and you see that difference. That surprised me a lot. But then I started to look at how women and men interact different in the working environment here in Australia. And there is a lot of cultural differences that play a role. And then one of the things that I noticed is, going back to those weakness points, is that I've noticed here that showing how your feminism could be seen as a weakness. So what I've done is showing how that is not a weakness, just being authentic. That's just being yourself. And that's hard when you see that characteristic is being seen as a weakness. But if you just keep true to yourself, it starts shining and changing. And actually, I've seen in the last couple of years changes in Australia in that sense, and it's because I've seen more women of diverse backgrounds coming into not necessarily managerial spaces, but in the workplace and with all the movements that I've seen. So the more we keep bringing our authentic selves to the workplace, the more others can see reflected themselves, and then things start changing slowly. But it's hard because you feel vulnerable all the time. So I'm going back to work on yourself again and think about, well, is this really a weakness as others could see it? And if you find that it's something that you can find a strength from, then you just have to keep going. And what I've heard from people is, well, I like your authenticity, and I even think like, oh, you are so smiley. You smile all the time, and I was like, oh, I never realized that. So yeah, I think it's just about keep that makes you stronger, even if at some point you feel that a bit weak, but if you just keep going, it gets better.
And what I'm picking up, Carolina, and these are maybe they're definitely my words, not yours, but it feels like there's a sort of double burden here. There's the show up and do the job and perform well so that you can be valued and all of those other good things that come from having that strong identity in the workplace. But there's this second layer of like, oh, I need to inventory myself and check in on myself and make sure that I'm showing up in a way that's authentic to me when all of these pressures are kind of pushing me in this direction or that direction. And I was just sort of reflecting that sounds like a lot of emotional labor. And so how do you take care of yourself in the midst of all of that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And yeah, it takes a lot of energy and a spiritual growth. Actually, the last 5 years I've been in a journey of working more in my spiritual journey, and it's how you nurture yourself, and that comes back to knowing yourself better. And it's not to say, oh, I'm perfect or how I can improve, because sometimes I've been doing this my whole life, but it was always about what is the next thing that I need to learn or that I need to improve on, or how I fill in my gaps. But now it's more about how I can understand myself better, to be empathetic with myself, because that's the other thing, that we talk about empathy for others. But actually we need to start applying empathy to ourselves, and that's part of self-care. It's I'm not good enough, or I should know better, I should have done better, or comparing yourself with others. That's part of lack of empathy with yourself, which is something that not many people talk about. Self-love, self-care is about being empathetic with yourself also.
Yeah. And what have you found to be helpful in that space? Because I'm thinking from I feel pretty well supported, Carolina, in my roles at now. So I have a really excellent performance coach that helps me debrief. I have a really wonderful group of colleagues in coaching. I get wonderful supervision from Claire and some of the other folks at 3D. And so I guess I feel pretty lucky that I've got this kind of network to lean on. But I'm wondering if there's more around that self-care piece.
Yeah, I think that one of the things, because you mentioned all the things that you can do, and one of the things that that I've been trying to work on is actually to stop and rest a bit, and that it's okay to take time off, and to just do nothing, or to just sit down and have a cup of tea and do nothing, and being with yourself. That's part of self-care. That's what I've learned a lot, because we are in this world that you always have to be productive, you always have to do something good, so you should be and I've been looking at some trends in LinkedIn, people saying this thing about pushing that every time, if you have a bit of time, then you should be studying something, you should be learning a new skill, you should be doing something else. And some others saying, well, actually stopping and doing nothing, it's also good for yourself. And not feeling guilty about it, because I felt guilty many times about, I'm not doing something productive right now, and then the stress starts creeping in, and it's like, no, you're wasting your time. So I think that's the balance. Yes, finding new ways of becoming a better person or learning something new, it's important, and having your networks of support, but also taking time off, and that's part of self-care.
I'm so happy that you raised that. I've been watching with interest the kind of conversation about back to the office versus working from home, and there's kind of evangelists on both ends of those spectrums, and of course probably the answer is somewhere in the middle, as it always is, but on the working from home front, I've seen so much about productivity, I can achieve so much, and I sort of thought, well, actually, I used to quite like my walk to the tram stop, or I used to quite like listening to a podcast on my way into work, or on my way home. It kind of de-stressed me, and it helped me close out my day well. And I don't know that I want to be productive every single second of every day. So I really like this, this reminder about rest.
Yeah.
And fun.
Yeah, and even human interaction, because now that you talk about in the working space with being productive and working from home, I've heard people saying, yes, I'm more productive at home because no one is interrupting me. Yes, you're right. But on the other hand, it's how much do you miss from just talking to someone at the kitchenette while you're having a coffee, and that brings another team building and cultural benefits, but personally how that nurtures yourself, and that helps us to create that sense of empathy and getting to know other humans. That is not just about meeting them on a, well, we have 30 minutes, we're here to talk about this in front of a computer. You lose that touch of knowing the person behind their role or behind the task that you have at hand, and that's part of empathy skills. And with kids, that has happened the same during the pandemic, when they were talking about not only that they lost time in the learning process, but it's more about developing those early skills of socializing and developing empathy through simply interactions face to face with their peers, and they lost all of those opportunities of that face to face interaction.
You've given us so much to think about on this topic, Carolina. Thank you so much for talking so openly with us about some of the highs and the lows of this journey, and your leadership journey particularly. But for listeners who might want to kind of delve a little bit deeper or take this idea a little bit further, is there, we had this notion of a kind of wrap, something to watch, read, listen to, or ponder, and I wondered if you had any sort of recommendations for people that want to delve a little bit deeper.
Yeah. So there, I was thinking about it, and in terms of watching, I was at the beginning, I was thinking about, well, I watch a lot of TED Talks and all those kind of things. But I was like, something fun to do. And actually, the best things to watch on empathy are those movies that are designed in theory for kids, but they are so profound in teaching empathy. And one of them is that movie Up. Because it's this old guy that just lost her partner, his partner, and he starts all this long journey to find himself first, but through that he starts developing empathy. The kid that is there and how two different generations start developing this relationship. It's all about building empathy, but also understanding yourself to develop empathy.
What an amazing recommendation. And I reckon if you make it through the first 10 minutes of that movie without at least welling up or shedding a tear, then empathy checks are needed, I reckon.
Yeah.
It's a pretty special beginning to a movie. What a great recommendation. I haven't thought about that film for a long time, but you're absolutely right.
Yes. I think that it's and if it makes you cry, and it's because it touches that nerve. But if you've already watched it, if you think about it in, well, can I learn here from empathy? It's that you will find new things, because I've done it in the past, and it's like, oh yeah, this part when how they start connecting, it's a pure exercise of empathy.
Wonderful.
So that's the one on watching. On reading, on the opposite, I got a bit more academic. But I found there is a book that Harvard Business Review did that is called Empathy, but it's a collection of articles. But the article that I want to recommend the most from that book is one that is called "It's Hard to Empathize with People If You've Been in Their Shoes." And it's because it talks about what I was referring to during our conversation, that being very conscious that when you've been in those shoes, it's harder, because you have to leave yourself outside if you really want to empathize with that person. Yep. So I think that's something that we all need to work on to become better at empathy, because it's easier when you haven't been there, so at least you don't have context, so it's easier to empathize. But when you've been there, it's harder.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Another good recommendation. And I should say we'll put the links to these in the show notes as well, so if people want to have a little delve, then they can.
Yeah, awesome. In terms of audio, I'm kind of cheating a bit here, because it's kind of in between reading, because they talk about the book, but it's Oprah Super Soul. She was talking to Daniel Goldman about emotional intelligence. Yeah. So I think that podcast, when they talk about the emotional intelligence book, which is very famous, but again, sometimes we think about it in terms of how it compares to IQ. But if we think about the principles that he talks about it in emotional intelligence, is some of those principles about knowing yourself that could help you to become a better at empathy. So that's why. And in terms of practicing or pondering, this is not going to sound surprising after what we've been discussing, but for me, it's about things like meditation, like being with yourself, like spending time to getting to know yourself a bit better, and sitting in discomfort, because sometimes that's uncomfortable. Also, being with yourself and working on yourself is uncomfortable, but that trains you to be better at empathy and being in discomfort with someone else's experience. So that would be my recommendation.
Lovely. Thank you so much for your time today, Carolina. You've given us so much to think about. I mean, there there are a few things that are front of mind for me, that that idea of awareness, and am I kind of slipping into assuming that I know some things about this, and have I done the work on myself to know whether I'm truly empathizing or I'm bringing and overlaying my experience. And the other piece that really has resonated for me, and I'm sure there'll be lots more for other listeners, is that idea of empathy to self and the self-care, and how important that is to be able to practice empathy with others. The sort of reciprocal nature of that, I think you've talked really beautifully about. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, folks, for listening. We'll absolutely put all of these great recommendations in the show notes. So for those of you that want to delve a little deeper, along with links to Carolina's LinkedIn, so that if you want to follow or connect and understand more about her work, you can do that. And then we'll see you next week in another episode of In the Arena, where we pick up another leadership quality to explore. Have the rest of a fantastic day wherever you are. Bye-bye.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, we'd love you to share the podcast with a friend or leave a comment on social media. And if you'd like to become a regular at the Coaching In, you can subscribe on Podbean and all major podcast channels. We look forward to welcoming you next time. You've been listening to The Coaching In, 3D Coaching's virtual pub. For more information, check out 3dcoaching.com.